Hey everyone, Tactics here with another Dragonflight Season 1 Mythic Plus guide, where in this video I'll be diving into the Azure Vault. This includes going over things like dangerous trash mobs, important interrupts, dispels, and stops, explanations of all the boss mechanics, and even a simple thundering route that will be great for pugging early on in the season. Currently, my Algathar Academy guide is already out, and I'll be putting out similar videos for all the other dungeons in the first Mythic Plus season very soon. And once the season is actually here, I'll be putting out a lot of Mythic Plus and Raid content, including Advanced Dungeon and Mythic Boss guides. So if any of that sounds like something you'd like to see, make sure you guys do subscribe to the channel and click on that bell to be notified when those get posted. Now, let's jump into Azure Vault, starting with the trash you'll face on your way to the first boss. Right out of the bat, there are a bunch of flowers here. Conjured Lashers are what they're called, and they have one ability, Mystic Vapors. This is a 100-yard party-wide stacking magic dot, and these guys come in packs of like 2 to 3 usually around this area. This cast is interruptible, this cast is stoppable, and if it goes on people, obviously it is dispellable, but if you don't have a mass dispel, you can only clear one person, and this is a very high priority dot. If this stacks up too high, even a couple stacks on higher fortified keys is very, very scary, so you really want to avoid that as much as possible. Use those kicks, use those AoE stuns on these groups. Very, very important. Alongside these guys are Arcane Tenders. These are lieutenant mobs, so they're not CCable, but they have a kick in erratic growth. This is a random target ability, which will stun them for 6 seconds. It's a magic stun, so it can be dispelled, but just be careful because this will spread to nearby players once it goes off, so don't be too close to these guys. They also have Wild Eruption, which is just a swirly that spawns under a few party members. Just avoid that. Patrolling throughout the starting area are also Shrieking Whelps. These guys have a circle of true sight around them, and if you step into it or aggro them in any way, they'll try and cast Shriek, and if that goes off, it'll unleash nearby mobs that are currently trapped in stone and not targetable or aggroable, and it will make them instantly aggro to you, and that can be bad news for sure. In terms of what these mobs actually are, they are a bunch of Crystal Furies, which are very similar to the mob in Neltharion's Lair. They have Piercing Shards, which is a frontal attack targeting the tank, which is stoppable and something you will want to stop because it is pretty heavy hitting, as well as Arcane Fury, which is just a self buff. It is a magic buff, so you can purge it, you can steal it, but this is also stoppable as well if you can't do either of those things, so you will want to try and do that. The other mob these stone guys are accompanied by our Crystal Thrashers. They also have 2 abilities, but this is a lieutenant mob like the Arcane Tender, so not CCable. They have Splintering Shards, which is a 7-yard AoE circle on 3 party members at a time. Just want to make sure you're spread out, you don't stack these. And also Crystalline Rupture, which is just a 15-yard AoE around the mob that will root you for 6 seconds if you're hit. Once you make your way towards the first boss room, there are a bunch of bubbling saplings here. These guys just have one ability on death. They will cast Sappy Burst, which is just a 7-yard AoE explosion. This is very, very hard hitting, so make sure you are not in these swirlies when these guys die. Once you actually clear this room, Leymor, the first boss, will become active, and the main thing you need to do throughout this fight is manage his leyline sprouts. These are just small plants he spawns around the room that have a small 5-yard puddle surrounding them, and this puddle actually does tick quite hard, so be careful. Why this is actually a problem is that every so often the boss will use Consuming Stomp, which is a big arcane party hit that deals 20% increased damage per sprout that is alive. So this gets lethal very, very quickly, especially in higher tyrannical keys whenever there's even a single sprout left alive. Luckily, there are a couple ways to eliminate these sprouts. Between each stomp cast, the boss will cast Erupting Fissure. This is just a frontal attack pointed at where the tank currently is. It will not follow them, so you have to pre-position this boss well, and this will also destroy any sprouts caught in the cone. Using this cone, your goal is to hopefully get 4 sprouts, but as long as you're getting somewhere between 2 and 6, you'll be just fine. The remaining sprouts you have to clear with Explosive Brand. How this works is the boss will channel up a hit within 12 yards, which you want to avoid, back up away from the boss, and after that goes off, he'll knock everyone back and put a brand on each member of the party. These brands explode in a 15-yard AoE after 6 seconds, and while this explosion will hurt you and any party members inside of it, it also destroys the sprouts, so you can use these to hopefully kill all of the remaining sprouts in the room. Just be sure you are spread out enough when this cast goes off, because you only have 6 seconds, right? You want to get as many as you can In those 6 seconds, you don't want to overlap, so you want to pre-spread just a little bit after the tank frontal goes out and you know what sprouts you need to kill still. Note that whenever you do actually kill a sprout, a volatile sapling ad will spawn that you need to deal with. These are basically the same thing as the bubbling saplings that were in this room initially. They're low HP, and on death they channel a 7-yard explosion that you just want to avoid. Other than that, the boss just has a pretty nasty tank buster and infused strike, which is an arcane hit that also puts a 10-second dot on you. Once you get this boss down, you can move out towards the platforms. There's a couple mobs out here as well. So the Arcane Elemental just has a tank hit that is interruptible in Arcane Bolt, as well as a random target sleep in Waking Bane. This is interruptible, this is stoppable, and if it does go out, this is a magic dispel as well. Any of those three work just fine. Moving forward, there are also some unstable curators here. Heavy Tome, another arcane tank hit that is interruptible, as well as Forbidden Knowledge. This is a channeled ability, can't be stopped since this mob is a lieutenant mob again, but basically just swirlies kind of rain down from the sky. Be careful, tanks especially, because getting hit by one of these swirlies will disorient you, and that is bad news for the rest of the party if you get hit. Rune Seal Keepers are also in this area. 2 spells, again, both interruptible. Condensed Frost, yet another tank hit, but this one is Frost, as well as Icy Bindings, which is a party hit, as well as a magic root. So again, Master Spell could be useful here. If you do let one of these go off, you can clear that root, but ideally, this is a pretty high priority spell. You want to make sure this is getting kicked. Once you move to the lower platform, you'll find some arcane constructs. These guys have a pretty nasty frontal attack in Arcane Bash, so watch that. Again, this does not follow the tank, so the tank can avoid it as well. It also has a pretty large knockback attached to it, so be careful because you can be knocked off the edge. On top of this, these mobs also use Conjured Barrier. This is just a small self-cast absorb shield they put on themselves. You can purge this, or you can just DPS right through it. Once you move into the second boss's room, there are a bunch of Vault Guards. These guys have another tank hit, an Ice Cutter. This is physical and frost mixed, as well as a self buff in Brilliant Scales. This is a 30% magic DR. Again, is a magic buff, so can be purged. There's also Astral Attendants in this area, which have just one cast, unstable power. You can't hard stop these, so if you stop it, you stun this ad, it'll just keep trying to cast it. If this does go off, when this does go off really, a bunch of 3-yard swirlies just spawn all over the place. You just want to make sure you dodge these. The only other new mob in this area is the mini boss Scalebane Lieutenant. This guy has Ice Cutter, this guy has Brilliant Scales, just like the Vault Guard, but he also has Spell Frost Breath, which is a frontal channeled at the tank, which will follow them, so you have to kind of stay away from the party here and plant. This is a pretty nasty hit, so make sure you have something for this. On top of this, they have a big aura around themselves, Mage Hunter's Fervor, and this will give a 25% damage buff to all of their allies nearby, so you want to be very careful what you're pulling with this mini boss. That brings us to the boss Azureblade, and she has 2 distinct phases. In the first phase, she'll occasionally summon a Draconic Image. This just spam casts Illusory Bolt, which is a random target interruptible cast, which you'll want to kick as these do hit pretty hard. Once this mob dies, it also shoots out a bunch of 3-yard swirlies from unstable magic, which you'll want to avoid. Outside of that, she has Arcane Cleave, which is a magic tank hit that doubles as a frontal, so beware, and Ancient Orb, which is a line attack at a random player that deals damage and knocks back anyone in the orb's path, and this is very lethal as well, so you want to avoid that. Once Azureblade runs out of mana, she'll run to the center of the room and start phase 2. She spawns 4 Draconic Illusions around her and becomes immune to damage thanks to their channels. They don't do anything else besides channel into the boss immunity, but there is still a lot going on in this phase. First, pulsing party damage every 2 seconds while the boss is immune. Second, there's orbs that shoot out from the boss in waves. A lot of orbs all over the place, very similar to the phase 1 orbs, just there's more of them and they're much less lethal than the phase 1 orbs. If that's not enough though, these illusions also have unstable magic, so each time you kill one, you also have a bunch of swirlies to dodge. Once you're able to get all 4 ads down, the boss goes back into phase 1 at full mana and the fight just repeats from there. Delving even deeper into the vault, you have 3 mobs in this next area before the 3rd and 4th boss together. So first off, there's a Lieutenant mob Draconid Breaker. These guys have Shoulder Slam, which is a random target charge attack. They'll charge in a line, of course, and they'll knock back and hit anyone in the path. They also have Bestial Roar, which is a 30-yard physical hit on the entire party. Joining them are Terrasec Looters, which just have Tear Flesh. This is just a tank hit that has a stacking bleed attached to it, so be careful how many of these get stacked up, as well as Froggy Boys, Null Magic Hornswogs, and these mobs will just cast Null Stomp on random players. It's just a cast of a jump. They'll jump up in the air very, very slowly and land in a 5-yard AoE. That's something you just want to avoid. Know that because these guys can actually jump anywhere, we found it's actually better to have your group generally stacked up in melee area, maybe within like 10 to 15 yards of each other, close to melee, so that these frogs aren't jumping all over the place, right? Because if ranged are 40 yards away and you see frogs jumping all the way out, you're in for a pretty rough time in terms of killing those guys in a timely manner. From here, you have back-to-back bosses, starting with Telash Greywing, which is a pretty simple fight overall. Every time the boss reaches full energy, he'll jump to the center of the room, take 99% reduced damage, and cast Absolute Zero, which just explodes for massive party damage after 8 seconds. This is livable in lower keys, but once you start getting higher up, the only way to survive without a major defensive or immunity is to stand in one of the 3 vault runes spread across this boss platform, which all provide 50% DR to this hit. Note that these runes do take a couple minutes to kind of reactivate and recharge after using them, so you'll need to make your way around the platform in a circle and use each rune before coming back full circle to the first rune that you used. To make this a little bit more difficult, frost bombs are constantly thrown around on the entire party. They explode after a few seconds in a 5-yard radius, and they leave a slow puddle on the ground for 2.5 minutes. This can eat up a lot of space, but honestly the platform is fairly forgiving in terms of the space it provides you to drop these bombs off, so I recommend doing something like a U-shape near the boss so you don't cleave your party members with that 5-yard splash, and so that each party member has a safe path out of their puddle very quickly. They don't have to walk through anyone else's puddle to get to safety. The only other ability this boss has is Icy Devastator, which is a random target channeled attack that takes 4 frost damage 3 times over 3 seconds and splashes to anyone within 8 yards. This usually follows a frost bomb detonation, so you will want to be careful with your positioning when you're running back towards the boss after that happens. Once Telash is defeated, you move right beneath his platform to where the big dragon Umbrelskul is hanging out. This boss has an aura the entire time you're fighting him, causing movement but a stacking 7% slow on you. This is a magic effect, so it can be dispelled. It also resets if you don't move for 10 seconds, or when you use any sort of ability that will break slows or roots, so things like Druid Shapeshifting or Blessing of Freedom as an example, but lots of abilities that will help you there. In terms of actual boss abilities you'll have to deal with, like all dragons, he has a breath attack that you'll want to watch out for in Crystalline Roar. Tanks too, make sure you do step out of this because it won't follow you and it deals a ton of damage. You definitely want to avoid it. Speaking of a ton of damage for tanks, Dragon Strike is the tank buster here, which is a big arcane hit with a 10-second magic dot, similar to that first boss, except this one ticks way harder. Luckily, this is a magic dispel as well, so healers, do make sure you invest a dispel on your tank here, otherwise they will for sure cry. Every 25% HP, so at 75%, 50%, and 25%, the boss will spawn some detonating crystals as well as a hardened crystal, which is essentially the same thing, just has an absorb shield on it, so it has more health. And all these crystals do is just channel Fracture for 20 seconds. If this cast ends up completing, they'll explode for a stacking party dot, and that is bad news. It hurts a lot. You'll just want to focus these crystals down whenever they spawn, and we've found that if you pull the boss over to one of the edges of the room and tank him against one of these walls, it actually helps spawn these crystals a bit more clustered than if you tank him in like the middle of the room, for example. This is pretty useful when you take into account the fact that you're constantly getting slowed with movement, so if these are clustered together, you have to move less and you get slowed less, which is just very nice. This boss also does have an energy bar, and when that fills up, he'll cast Arcane Eruption, which spawns a bunch of crackling vortexes around the room that will just chase down nearby party members and deal very heavy arcane damage if you're within 7 yards of them. Again, something you'll want to avoid, but that is easier said than done with that stacking slow that is also going out from movement here, so just be careful and try your best to stay away from these when they do come out. Lastly, between all of these abilities, the boss will sometimes cast Unleash Destruction, which is just a party hit that also knocks everyone back, so be careful when this goes out, especially if those crackling vortexes are on the field, because you do not want to get knocked into one of those. That wraps up the trash and boss abilities, so let's get into the simple, pug-friendly route shown here in MDT. I'll post a link to this down in the description below if you want it for yourself for your own use. For importing, basically right off the bat here, these 3 mobs are in stone. There is that Shrieking Whelp that patrols starting over here and around the room counterclockwise. What you can do, and what I recommend you doing in a pug environment especially, is just shooting the gap between these groups of enemies and pulling this as your first pull. So these guys are the guys that have that stacking party dot that is interruptible and stoppable. The problem is, obviously, in pug groups, I'm sure as a lot of you know, relying on pugs to get kicks or get stops is something you probably shouldn't do. And I think doing a pull, like pulling these 3 guys into this pack, or something which I think you're actually going to see a lot in coordinated groups and high keys, is a pull like this, just because they are much more coordinated. They have those AoE stops, they have voice comms, whatever. That's a pull you're probably going to see because it's not too bad in a coordinated group. But in a pug, let's keep it simple. Let's do something that is less scary and less likely to wipe you instantly if you mess it up. So we'll do this. There's just 1 tender and 3 of these lashers, so you want to get that kick on the tender. Then you want to have a kick or a stop on each of these lashers. Similarly out here, just 4 lashers together. AoE stops are going to be very, very helpful for you here. Even single target stops combined with kicks, very useful. Once you kill these 4, you can jump down the ledge over here and start clearing these mobs. So I have this as 1 pull. But again, reminder, volatile saplings, very low HP. They'll die very, very quickly and just do their on-death explosion. You're just kind of dragging these tenders to each other throughout this room. Grab the first one or the second one. Once you feel comfortable, either add that third. Maybe you wait for the first one to die before you add the third one. And just grab all these saplings as you can, rotating around the room here. Then you have the first boss. Before you move downwards a little bit here, you've got a little gauntlet here of shrieking whelps that you just want to avoid. These guys are all inactive, so don't worry about them. And then you move through, you got some arcane elementals blocking your path before moving to the platform here. This platform doesn't let you teleport to the one below it until you've killed everything on this platform, so we are going to do that here. There might be some maybe slow fall, levitate shenanigans in the future, but for now, let's assume in a pug group, we're just going to kill all this stuff. And note, just like in the Algathar Academy video, if these pulls are too big for you, feel free, especially early on in the season when you're under geared a little bit, to just cut these pulls like this, right? Like just do these one at a time, for example, if you need to. Note though that this pack in particular right here, it pats all the way up to this pack. So be very careful. If you want to separate these pulls, you do need to drag this 3-pack, which is 3 casters, over this way a little bit just so you won't get patted into here. Otherwise, all these stone guys on this platform are active. They're not actually in stone like the ones before them, so you do have to fight these as well. And then you make your way downstairs. These are the frontal guys here. We just pulled them all together. Note that they do actually melee quite hard for a tank player, so just be careful of that and make sure you are sidestepping those frontals even as a tank, because those frontals are nasty. You move up here, you're pulling these. This is a pat as well. Know that this pat will go all the way from Arcane Construct 2-pack here, all the way around the circle to the other Arcane Construct, and then back. So be careful where you're pulling the other stuff on this platform in case this pat is there. You do not want to pull all this stuff with that pat in a pug. That's a very, very bad idea, trust me. Moving into the second boss's room here, a couple pats in this area as well. This 3-pack is patting along the front here. This is the Lieutenant mini boss. He pats in a circle around the entire room, so be careful, especially if you're doing this pull here. You do not want him added to this pack because that is going to be a lot of damage going out, and that is very, very deadly. So be careful when you're actually adding this guy, because again, he has that aura that increases damage of everyone around him. Be very, very careful when you're adding him to packs. Once you've cleared the room, you then can engage Azureblade, and then you move down into the vault even further, and this is where you get the fun pulls. So this is where you get the really, really big pulls, because it's a bunch of frogs that don't really do much, and delvers, which are relatively low HP. They have that tank bleed that stacks up. Of course, you want to be careful. Maybe coordinate stuns later on in pulls if it gets bad, but honestly, it hasn't been too bad because they die so quickly. And you do have, of course, the Draconid breakers here, but again, their damage is pretty low, honestly. They have that charge attack, and obviously it's not the ideal if like your entire party gets hit by a charge and knocked up or back a little bit, but overall, pretty low damage. You can pull a ton of stuff with it. So what we have is just pulling all of this room here, and then we just pull everything down and LOS it down here and grab all this stuff here, and then we pull this, not quite the whole room because you'd be over % at that point, but most of this room, just leaving 1 frog and 1 delver in there, and the last 2 backup breakers, because pulling 3 breakers in 1 pull seems a little bit sus for a pug group, so I'm going to leave those 2 separate. Reminder on that tip though, make sure with these frogs, if you're a ranged player, it is actually better, especially if you have melee DPS in your group as well, to try and stay closer to melee as close as you can, maybe within 10 yards ideally, because those frogs will jump to everyone. So if you're 40 yards away from the pack and they jump towards you, all of a sudden your melee has 0 uptime on that frog, right? So, and they jump very slowly. They are very slow. These swirlies are pretty easy to dodge, all things considered, because they shows the swirly, does a cast, jumps up in the air, and he's super slow. He's very slow. So stay in melee if you can. It'll really, really help you get through these packs way quicker because melee uptime will be way higher. From there, just back-to-back bosses, like I mentioned. Telash, kill him, go down, right to Umbrelskul, and that is it for the dungeon. So there it is, my complete Mythic Plus guide for Azure Vault in Dragonflight Season 1. Like I said earlier in the video, I will be posting guides just like this one for all 8 Dragonflight dungeons, and there'll be more in-depth advanced routing guides as well as walkthroughs from a tank perspective as well once the season actually starts. So if that is content that you're interested in, please do subscribe to the channel. It really does help. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop a comment down below or come ask me on my Twitch channel at Tactics, and I'll do my best to answer. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.